Tobias Reed was 41 years old, and for 3 years he believed his wife was dead. Every month, without missing a single payment, he sent $900 to his mother-in-law, Patrice, to cover her rent, a promise he made standing over Adrienne's grave. He never questioned why Patrice only ever met him at a diner, never questioned why she never let him past her front door. That Tuesday afternoon, his bank called about a flagged transaction error, and the account name they read back to him wasn't Patrice Walcott. It was Adrienne Hale, his wife's first name, a stranger's last name. He searched it that night, hands steady, expecting nothing. The photo loaded slowly. His wife, smiling, alive, dated 3 months ago. For 3 years he'd grieved a woman who was living 2 states away. Spending money he sent a dead woman's mother. Tobias closed the laptop, and in that silence he made a decision that would end 3 lives exactly as he intended. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen table was clean. Always clean. Tobias Reed kept it that way, the same way he kept everything. Deliberately, without thinking too hard about why. The bills were sorted by due date. The laptop was open to his bank portal. A cup of coffee sat 2 inches from the edge, exactly where he always put it. He was a man of system. At work, that made him indispensable. Here, alone in a house built for 2, it just made the silence easier to manage. He scrolled through the pending transaction: electric, internet, car insurance. His eyes stopped where they always stopped. 3rd week of the month, same as it had been for 3 years. Walcott, rent, $900. He clicked confirm without hesitating. His title at Hartfield Logistics was Senior Project Manager, which meant he was the person everyone called when a shipment of medical supplies was stranded in Memphis, or when a vendor contract had a clause that could sink a quarter's numbers, or when someone needed to trace exactly where a 12-truck relay had broken down and fix it before morning. He was good at it, calm under pressure, precise. His supervisor, Donna, had told him last year that he had the kind of brain that finds the flaw before it becomes a problem. He'd said thank you and gone back to his spreadsheet. He was less good at the other things, the things that couldn't be organized into columns. He still wore his ring. A plain gold band, slightly worn at the edges. He hadn't made a decision to keep wearing it. He just hadn't made a decision to take it off. And somehow 3 years had passed. Adrienne had died on a Thursday. That was how he still thought of it. Not the date, not the month, just Thursday. Like the day itself had been the thing that failed him. She'd been visiting her college roommate in Tennessee. A 2-lane road outside Murfreesboro. A truck that crossed the center line, and that was it. Gone before the ambulance arrived, the deputy had told him over the phone. His voice had been gentle and tired in equal measure. Patrice had handled everything. Tobias had been in no condition to handle anything. She'd arranged for the cremation. Adrienne had always said she didn't want a burial, and by the time Tobias got to Nashville, there was nothing left to do but sit through a small memorial at a funeral home chapel with beige carpet and fake flowers, shaking hands with people he barely knew, nodding at things they said about his wife that may or may not have been true. He'd cried exactly once, alone in the rental car in the parking lot after. Then he'd driven back to the airport, flown home, and gone back to work 4 days later because staying home felt worse. He'd promised Patrice he'd take care of her. Standing in that parking lot, she'd looked so small. Her eyes red, her coat too thin for the weather. She was all I had left of her, Patrice had said. You understand that, don't you? He did. He thought he did. So the transfers started. $900 a month. Enough to keep her rent covered, utilities manageable, some dignity intact. They met for lunch once a month, always at the same diner on Clement Street, a place with red vinyl booths and a laminated menu that hadn't changed since the 90s. Patrice always arrived first, always chose the same corner booth, always ordered the same turkey club. Early on, he'd offered to come by her apartment, help her with repairs, check the windows for the winter. She'd waved it off like it was nothing. "Oh, you don't need to make that trip. It's such a boring neighborhood." He'd offered to help her find a better place, somewhere closer to him. She'd changed the subject so smoothly that he hadn't even noticed until he was back in the car. He'd offered once to put the landlord's number in his phone, in case there were ever issues with the building. He's very responsive. You don't need to worry yourself. He hadn't pushed. That wasn't his nature. He sent the money. She thanked him. He asked how she was sleeping. She asked if he was eating enough. And then they both went home separately, carrying the shape of someone who was no longer there. He'd never met her landlord, never seen the apartment, never gotten so much as an address. He hadn't questioned it. Grief has a way of making a person accept the edges of things without looking too closely. His phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. Local area code. He picked up out of habit. "Good evening. May I speak with Tobias Reed?" "Speaking." "Mr. Reed, this is customer support at First Central Bank. We've flagged a potential duplicate transaction error on your account. A recurring transfer for $900. We just need a moment to confirm the receiving account details with you before it processes." Tobias set down his coffee. "Sure," he said. "Go ahead." "Mr. Reed, I'm going to read back the account name attached to the transfer, and I need you to confirm whether this is correct." "Sure," Tobias said again. He reached for a pen without thinking. Old habit. The receiving account is registered under the name Adrienne Hale. The pen stopped moving. "Say that again." "Adrienne Hale. Hale. That's the name tied to the account your transfer has been depositing into." Tobias set the pen down. He looked at the laptop screen, at the transfer he'd just confirmed. "Walcott. Rent, $900. There's been a mistake," he said. His voice was steady. It was always steady. The account should be under Patrice Walcott. That's who the payment is for. "I understand, but I'm looking at 3 years of transaction history, Mr. Reed, and every payment has landed in this same account. Adrienne Hale. It's never routed anywhere else. 3 years." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Mr. Reed? I'm here." He pulled the laptop closer. "Can you tell me anything else about the account? A bank? A routing number? An address? I can confirm the receiving bank, but I'm not able to share personal details beyond what's already on the transfer record. What I can do is flag this for our fraud team and open a dispute if you believe this was unauthorized." "Do that," he said. "Flag it. I'll call back tomorrow." He hung up. The kitchen was very quiet. He sat there for a moment, not moving, just looking at the open laptop. The cursor blinked inside the transaction field. Adrienne Hale. He told himself it was a banking error. A name entered wrong somewhere 3 years ago, and nobody had ever caught it. That happened. Clerical mistakes happened all the time. He dealt with them at work constantly. A wrong SKU number, a miscued vendor ID, a shipment routed to the wrong distribution center because someone had transposed 2 digits in a zip code. Mistakes happened. He typed the name into the search bar anyway. Adrienne Hale. The results were thin. A few LinkedIn profiles that were clearly wrong. Wrong ages, wrong faces. A mention in a local 5K race results page in what looked like a small town. He clicked on it. The name was listed, but nothing else. He went to Facebook. He typed the name. Several results loaded. He scanned them one by one. A teenager in Ohio. A woman in her 60s with a profile full of cat photos. A private account with no photo visible. And then one more. The profile photo was small in the search result. Just a thumbnail. He almost scrolled past it. He didn't. He clicked the profile. The privacy settings had locked down almost everything. No posts visible, no friends list, no location listed. The profile was a wall. Whatever life existed behind it had been carefully tucked away from strangers. But the profile photo was public. It loaded slowly. His internet connection had always been sluggish in the evenings. He watched the image build itself from the top down, the way photos sometimes did. A blur of color, sharpening into detail, pixel by pixel. Dark hair first, then a smile, then a face he had looked at across a pillow, across a dinner table, across a parking lot, on the worst day of his life. Tobias stopped breathing. It was Adrienne, not a resemblance, not someone who looked like her. It was her, the exact angle of her jaw, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a fall she'd taken in college, the way she smiled with her whole face, like she couldn't help it. She was standing somewhere sunny, maybe a porch or a backyard, wearing a yellow shirt he'd never seen. Her hair was shorter than he remembered. She looked happy. She looked alive. The timestamp on the photo said it had been uploaded 11 months ago. Tobias looked at it for a long time. His hands were on the keyboard, and they were shaking. Not badly. Not the kind of shaking anyone else would notice. Just a fine, quiet tremor. The kind that comes before something bigger, before the body understands what the mind hasn't caught up to yet. He thought about the memorial, the beige carpet, the fake flowers, the deputy's tired voice on the phone, gone before the ambulance arrived. He thought about Patrice in the parking lot, her coat too thin, her eyes red. She was all I had left of her. He thought about $900 a month, every month, for 36 months. He looked at the photo again. His wife smiled back at him from the screen. He didn't close the laptop. He should have. Sitting there staring at her face wasn't doing anything useful. He knew that. But his body hadn't gotten the message yet, so he just sat in the kitchen with the screen glowing against his face and the photo right there, and he let himself look at it for another minute. Just one more minute. Then he shut the laptop. The kitchen went dark except for the small light above the stove that he always left on. It cast a yellowish glow over the counter, the sink, the empty dish rack. Everything exactly where it should be. Everything the same as it had been an hour ago, before the bank called, before the name, before the photo. Nothing was the same. He pressed both hands flat on the table. He could feel the grain of the wood under his palms. He focused on that. Solid. Real. He breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth. Slow and even. The way he'd taught himself to breathe during high-pressure work situations when everything was falling apart and people were looking to him to hold the whole operation together. Think. Not feel. Think. His first instinct was to drive to Patrice's apartment, to pound on her door and stand in the hallway and watch her face when he said the name. Adrienne Hale. He wanted to see it. He wanted to watch the lie break open in real time. He didn't move, because that was what she would expect. That was the version of this she could prepare for. A grieving, angry man showing up at her door with nothing but his feelings and no plan. She would cry. She would deflect. She would have an explanation ready, something thin but just believable enough to make him doubt himself. And she would spend whatever time he gave her closing up every crack he'd pried open. He wasn't going to give her that. He got up from the table. He went to the drawer beside the refrigerator where he kept pens and rubber bands and old takeout menus he never threw away. He found a notebook, a small one, dark blue cover, the kind he used for field notes when he was running a site visit. He brought it back to the table, opened it to the first page, and started writing. Not frantically, not in the shaky scrawl of someone falling apart. He wrote in his usual tight, even hand. Transfer, $900 month, 36 months, $32,400 total. Account name, Adrienne Hale, not Patrice Walcott. Account receiving payments for 3 years. Same account every month. Never rerouted. He wrote down the dates he could remember. The call from the deputy. The memorial. No body. She said remains were already handled. Cremation out of state. He wrote that down and stared at it. He'd accepted that at the time because grief had made him stupid, and Patrice had done all the arranging, and he'd just gone where she pointed him and stood where she told him to stand. He wrote down Patrice's habits. The diner on Clement Street. Every meeting in public. Never once invited him up to the apartment. Maintenance issue, she'd say. Too cluttered right now. Next time, she'd say. 3 years of next times. He wrote down the 5K listing. The Facebook profile. Privacy locked. Photo public. Confirmed identity. Yellow shirt. Shorter hair. Uploaded 11 months ago. He wrote, "She looks happy." Then he crossed that out. It wasn't relevant. He looked at what he had. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't enough. It was the edge of something much larger, and he could feel the shape of it without being able to see the whole picture yet. There were questions he couldn't answer from a kitchen table at midnight. A funeral without a body. A bank account under a name that wasn't his wife's name and wasn't Patrice's. 3 years of payments that went somewhere he hadn't understood until tonight. He needed records. He needed someone who knew how to pull them. He checked the clock on the microwave. 11:48 p.m. Yvonne was going to be annoyed. He picked up his phone and called her anyway. It rang 4 times. Then her voice came through, rough with sleep and sharp with suspicion, because Yvonne Price did not receive late-night calls without immediately assuming catastrophe. "Tobias, it's midnight." "I know." "Are you hurt?" "No." A pause. He could hear her sitting up. "What happened?" He looked at the notebook on the table, at the name he'd written at the top of the page and underlined twice without realizing it. Adrienne Hale. "Adrienne isn't dead," he said. Silence. Not a short silence. A long one. The kind that meant she was working through it the same way he had, trying to find the version of that sentence that made sense. Say that again. Her voice had changed completely. The sleepiness was gone. "She's alive. I found a photo. There's more to it. A lot more. But I need your help pulling records. Funeral. Financial. Whatever we can get to." Another pause. Shorter this time. "I'll be at your place at 7, Yvonne said. "Don't touch anything until I get there." Yvonne's office was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and printer ink. Small. Practical. A desk buried under stacked folders, 2 monitors, a corkboard on the wall covered in pinned notes and highlighted documents, a coffee maker on the filing cabinet that she'd already run twice by the time Tobias walked in at 7:04. She handed him a cup without a word. He set the laptop and the notebook on the edge of her desk. She looked at both of them, then looked at him, taking in his face the way she always did, reading him like a document, checking for damage. "You sleep?" she asked. "A little." She didn't push it. She pulled the laptop toward her, opened it, and he leaned over and navigated to the Facebook profile. The photo loaded. Adrienne's face, clear as day. That yellow shirt. Her hair cut shorter than he'd ever seen it. Yvonne stared at it for a long moment. "Okay," she said quietly. Just that. Okay. Like she was sealing something shut inside herself so she could work. She turned to her own monitor. The funeral home hadn't been hard to find. Tobias still had the paperwork, or what he'd thought was paperwork, in a folder he'd kept in the bottom drawer of his home office. He'd brought it with him. Seaview Memorial Services. A small operation. A 40-minute drive from the city. He'd never set foot there. Patrice had handled everything, and at the time, he'd been grateful. He hadn't wanted to handle things. He'd wanted someone to tell him where to stand and when to sit down. He hated himself a little for that now. Yvonne made the call herself, using her firm's letterhead for the follow-up records request. Her voice on the phone was calm and professional and gave nothing away. When she hung up, She typed while she talked. "They're pulling the file. They'll email the documentation inside the hour." She glanced at him. "I also submitted a request to the State Vital Records Office for a death certificate under Adrienne Marie Reed. Date of death, the date Patrice gave you." Tobias nodded. "If there's no certificate on file," Yvonne said, "then there's no legal death. Meaning Adrienne Reed is not dead in the eyes of the state. Meaning your widower status is—" "Not real," he said. "Not real," she confirmed. They waited. Yvonne worked on other things, moving through her morning like it was any other. Tobias sat in the chair across from her desk and drank his coffee, and watched the clock on her wall. The second hand moved. Outside the window, the street was filling up with the ordinary noise of a Tuesday morning. Buses, voices, someone's car alarm going off 2 blocks away and then stopping. 40 minutes later, the email came. Yvonne opened the attached file and turned one of her monitors so they could both see it. The document from Seaview was short. Shorter than it should have been. She scrolled through it slowly, reading. Tobias read alongside her. "Cremation service. No viewing. No remains transport. Local processing only. Payment received in full. Cash by one Patrice L. Walcott. Authorization signed by same." That was nearly all there was. No death certificate attached. No intake record for a body transported from out of state. No accident report. No coroner's documentation. Nothing that should have preceded a cremation. Nothing that legally had to precede a cremation was in that file. Yvonne pulled up the state records response next. It had come through while they were reading. She opened it. No record found. No death certificate on file for Adrienne Marie Reed. The room was very quiet. Tobias set down his coffee cup carefully, because his hand wanted to do something, and that was the safest option available. "She paid for a cremation," Yvonne said, her voice low and precise, "with no body, which means the funeral home either didn't ask the right questions or didn't care enough to ask them. She wrote the obituary herself. I remember it. It was on that little program you kept. She organized the memorial. She stood next to you at that service and cried." Yvonne paused. "There was never a death certificate because there was never a death. She built the whole thing out of paperwork that looked real from the outside and nothing underneath." Tobias looked at the screen, at the short, damning document from Seaview, at the blank response from the state. "She planned this," he said. It wasn't a question. He'd already known it somewhere since the notebook last night, but saying it out loud in the flat light of Yvonne's office made it a different kind of real. "Yes," Yvonne said. "And Patrice didn't just go along with it. She built it, she paid for it, she ran it." He nodded slowly. The anger was there. It had been there since midnight, sitting just below the surface, patient and hot and very still. He wasn't going to let it move until he knew exactly where to point it. "I need to find out where she actually is," he said. "A real address, not just a profile." Yvonne leaned back in her chair and looked at him. "Then we need Dad," she said. Curtis Reed lived in the same house he'd raised his kids in. A single-story brick home on a quiet street, with a driveway that always needed resealing and a porch light that had been flickering for 6 months because Curtis kept forgetting to replace the bulb. The grass was cut short. The mailbox was straight. Everything about the place said, "A careful man lives here." He met them at the door before they knocked. "Saw your car pull up," he said. That was Curtis. He didn't miss things. He was 70 years old, but he moved like a man who hadn't fully retired from paying attention. Gray at the temples, broad through the shoulders, reading glasses tucked into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt. He looked at Tobias the way Yvonne had that morning, checking, measuring, and then stepped back to let them in. The kitchen table was already clear, like he'd been expecting them to need the space. Tobias laid it all out. The bank call, the name, the Facebook photo, the funeral home records, the missing death certificate. He set the printed documents on the table one at a time while he talked, and Curtis looked at each one without picking them up, the way he used to look at evidence at a scene, taking it in, not disturbing it. When Tobias finished, the kitchen was quiet. Curtis picked up his coffee mug, took a slow sip. "Patrice paid for the cremation in cash," he said. "Yes," Yvonne said. "No body intake record?" "Nothing." Curtis set the mug down. He looked at Tobias. "You doing all right?" "I'm focused," Tobias said. Curtis nodded, like that was the right answer. "Good. Stay that way." He reached over and pulled the sheet with the account name on it, Adrienne Hale, and looked at it for a moment. "You got a last known address tied to this account?" "No," Tobias said. "Just the name and the account number." Curtis folded the paper once and stood up. "Give me a few hours." They waited at the house. Yvonne worked from her laptop at the kitchen table. Tobias sat on the back porch and watched the light change over the yard. The same yard he and Yvonne used to run around in as kids. The same oak tree, the same chain-link fence along the back. Everything the same. He used to find that comforting. Right now, it just felt like the world refusing to acknowledge that anything had happened. He thought about Adrienne at the memorial service. The black dress, her hands folded in front of her. The way she'd leaned into him, let him hold her up, even cried into his shoulder. He'd held her and told her it was going to be okay. He'd told her that. While she was standing there knowing everything, he stopped thinking about it. Went back inside. Curtis called at 6:30. He didn't bother with preamble. "Address is in Claremont. That's 2 states over, east side of the city. Residential neighborhood. Property is leased under the name Desmond Hale. 43 years old. Licensed contractor. He and your wife have been at that address for at least 2 years based on utility records." A pause. "His name is on the lease. Her name is on the lease. Both as Hale." Tobias sat very still. "She took his name," Yvonne said from across the table. She'd heard it through the phone. "She did," Curtis said. "Or they built it together. Hard to say which came first." Papers rustled on his end. "I also had my contact pull financial records connected to the old joint account you and Adrienne held. The savings account." Tobias already knew it wasn't going to be good. "It was drained," Curtis said. 14 months before the memorial service. Not all at once. She moved it in pieces, small enough each time to stay under the reporting threshold. Transferred into an account under a name I'm still running down. But that account's been closed. Looks like she used it as a middle step, and then moved the money again, eventually into the Hale account. Tobias closed his eyes. The savings account. The one they'd talked about over dinner, made plans around, argued about contribution amounts, like it actually mattered. The one he'd kept funding after she'd died because he hadn't known what else to do with it. He'd closed it only 8 months ago. He opened his eyes. "How much?" he asked. "Little over 31,000, Curtis said. The number landed flat and heavy. "She was planning it for over a year," Yvonne said quietly. She wasn't surprised. She was just angry on his behalf. And she wasn't bothering to hide it anymore. "At least," Curtis said. "Maybe longer." Tobias looked down at the table, at the documents spread across it. 3 years of grief. 3 years of $900 a month to a woman who had stood at a fake memorial and cried into his shoulder. $31,000 moved out from under him in careful, quiet increments, while Adrienne smiled at him across the dinner table. He pulled in a slow breath. "I need to see Patrice," he said. "Not to confront her. Not yet." He looked at Yvonne. "I need to sit across from her and see what else she'll give me, without knowing I'm collecting it." The diner was called Millie's. It sat on the corner of Broad and 14th, a squat little building with a red awning and windows that always seemed slightly fogged, no matter the weather. Tobias had been coming here with Patrice for 3 years. Same booth by the window. Same sweet tea for her. Black coffee for him. Same small talk about nothing. He drove there on autopilot, parked in the same spot he always used, straightened his jacket in the rearview mirror and looked at himself for a moment. Stay in the role. That was what Yvonne had said that morning, standing in his doorway with a travel mug and sharp eyes. She doesn't know you know anything, so don't let her. He walked in. Patrice was already in the booth, wrapped in a tan cardigan, her silver hair pinned back neat and tidy. She looked up when he came through the door, and her whole face opened up into something warm and soft. Grieving mother-in-law. Beloved family. She had the performance down so cold it almost looked real. Almost. Tobias. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand when he sat down. Her fingers were dry and cool. You look tired, baby. Long week, he said. He smiled. He'd practiced the smile in the mirror that morning. How are you holding up? Oh, you know me. She waved a hand. I manage. The waitress came. Sweet tea, black coffee, the usual. Patrice talked about the weather, about a neighbor of hers who had a dog that barked too much, about a church event she'd attended the previous Sunday. Tobias nodded in the right places, asked the right small questions, and watched her the way his father had taught him to watch people, not staring, just present, noticing. She was relaxed today, more than usual. She picked up her tea and said almost casually, I've been trying to get the apartment cleaned up this week. Got some family coming through next weekend, so I've been in full preparation mode. She laughed a little. You know how I get. Tobias kept his face easy. Family visit? That's nice. Anyone I know? Just some folks from my mother's side, she said, not missing a beat. Smooth. Practiced. You wouldn't know them. He nodded. Took a slow sip of his coffee. There it is. Adriani and Desmond, coming to see her. A family visit she was cleaning up for. Patrice had no idea that Curtis had already put the pieces together 2 states over. She had no idea the word Claremont was already written in Tobias's notebook. He set his mug down. That'll be good for you. You shouldn't be alone so much. No, she agreed. I really shouldn't. They talked for another 20 minutes, the kind of comfortable, forgettable conversation that filled the space between the real things. And then Patrice folded her hands on the table, and her expression shifted, just slightly, a softening around the eyes, a faint tightening at the mouth. Tobias recognized it immediately. She was setting something up. I hate to even bring this up, she said. Her voice dropped lower, private, burdened. But I've been dealing with some medical stuff. Nothing too scary, but the bills have been something else. She shook her head slowly. I hate asking. You already do so much. What kind of bills? He asked. Just some tests. A follow-up or 2. She sighed and looked out the window. The insurance only covered part of it. I've been trying to manage on my own, but... She trailed off. Tobias looked at her, at the careful tilt of her head. The rehearsed hesitation. How much do you need? He asked. 400 would take care of most of it. He didn't pause too long, just enough to look like he was thinking it over. I can do that, he said. I'll add it to next month's transfer. Patrice reached over and squeezed his hand again. You are such a good man, Tobias. Adrienne always knew that. Her eyes got the faint wet shimmer she deployed when she mentioned Adriani's name. She always said that about you. She meant a lot to me, he said. Every word cost him something, but he paid it. He called Yvonne from the parking lot before he even started the car. She mentioned a family visit next weekend, he said, and she hit me up for $400. Medical bills? Did you give it to her? I told her I'd add it to the transfer. He stared through the windshield. I want you to pull my credit report. Full report. Tonight, if you can. A beat of silence. You think she's done more than the $900. I think a woman who's been running this kind of operation for 3 years didn't stop at one move. Yvonne called him at 9:47 that evening. There's a personal loan, she said. 18 months ago. $11,000. The lender is a regional financing company, and the signature on the application. She stopped. Tobias, it's not your signature. I've seen your signature 100 times. This is close, but it's not right. He was sitting at his kitchen table again. The same spot where this had all started. The laptop open in front of him. The notebook beside it, filling up page by page. He picked up his pen and wrote Patrice's name at the top of a fresh page. Then he wrote, "Loan, $11,000. Forged signature, 18 months ago." He underlined it once. Set the pen down. Patrice hadn't just helped Adrienne disappear. She'd been running her own quiet theft on the side, stitched right into the grief she'd manufactured for him. The medical bills tonight were just more of the same. She would keep going as long as he let her. He wasn't going to let her much longer. He pulled out his phone and texted Yvonne 2 words: "Save everything." Curtis Reed's house smelled like old coffee and wood polish. It always had. Tobias had grown up in that smell. As a kid, it meant safety. Right now, sitting at his father's kitchen table with a stack of printed documents spread out between them, it meant something different. It meant work. Curtis sat across from him, reading glasses low on his nose, a yellow legal pad at his elbow. Yvonne was beside Tobias, her laptop open, her pen moving. Nobody had touched the coffee Curtis made 20 minutes ago. Nobody was thinking about coffee. "Let me show you what Ron pulled," Curtis said. Ron Briggs, retired county records clerk. A man Curtis had worked with for 15 years before they both called it quits. Curtis had made 1 phone call, and Ron had delivered inside of 48 hours. Curtis slid a page across the table. Tobias picked it up. It was a lease agreement. A rental property in Claremont, 2 states away. A 2-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of a building called Meridian Court. The lease had been signed 18 months ago. 2 names sat at the bottom of the page: Desmond R. Hale, Adrienne M. Hale. Not Reed, not Walcott. Hale. Tobias read the names twice. Then he set the page down flat on the table and pressed his fingers against it, slowly, like he was making sure it was real. "He co-signed it," Yvonne said. Her voice was level but tight. "This isn't some guy who got lied to by a woman he was dating. He put his name next to hers on a legal document. He knew the name she was using. He knew it wasn't real, and he signed anyway." "That's the part that matters," Curtis said. He pulled off his glasses and set them on the table. In the eyes of the law, signing a lease with a fraudulent identity listed as a co-tenant isn't just sloppy. It's participation. Tobias said nothing. He was still looking at the page, at Adrienne's handwriting. He recognized it even after 3 years, the way she curved her capital A. He'd watched that hand-signed birthday cards, grocery lists, the deed to a car they bought together in 2019. Now it was on a lease for an apartment he'd never seen, next to a man he'd never met, under a name she had no legal right to use. "What about the money?" he asked. Yvonne turned her laptop so he could see the screen. "I cross-referenced the wire history from the joint savings account against the lease start date." She tapped the screen. The account was drained 14 months before her staged death. The total pulled out was $31,000, moved in chunks small enough to avoid automatic flags. The security deposit on the Meridian Court lease was $3,000. First and last month's rent on top of that. She sat back. The timing lines up exactly. Tobias did the math without meaning to. $31,000. The house fund. They had talked about that money at the dinner table. They had argued over whether to buy in the suburbs or closer to the city. He had worked overtime 3 separate months to help build that balance. She had been planning to take it the whole time. "So the apartment," he said. "It was bought with my money." "Partly," Yvonne said. "And Desmond knew what he was signing and who he was signing with. His name is on this. There's no version of this where he claims he didn't know." Curtis folded his hands on the table. "What you've got now, son, is the full picture. You've got a staged death with no body and no death certificate. You've got $31,000 in stolen savings. You've got Patrice running identity theft and loan fraud on the side. And you've got Desmond co-signing a fraudulent lease with a woman using a fabricated name. Tobias looked at each piece of paper on the table. The lease, the loan application with the forged signature, the bank records, the funeral home documentation showing no certificate filed with the state. 3 years of $900 transferred to an account he'd never controlled. Every piece had a name on it. Every piece had a date. Every piece was real. They're all coming together next weekend, he said. Patrice's family visit. Which means you have one window, Yvonne said. One moment where all three of them are in the same room. Then that's when it happens. He looked at her. All of it at once. Yvonne nodded slowly. She reached for a blank legal pad and slid it in front of him. Then let's talk about how. She uncapped her pen. You can't just walk in and lay it out, she said. You need the fraud reports filed before you show up. Not after, not during, before. So by the time you're standing in that room, the complaints are already moving. Patrice's loan fraud, the false death record, the property management company flagged on the lease. She looked at him steadily. You want this to be a door closing, not a confrontation they can spin later. Tobias picked up his pen. He thought about Patrice, squeezing his hand across the diner table. You are such a good man. He thought about Adriani's handwriting on that lease. He pressed the pen to the paper and wrote the first line of the plan. The legal pad filled up fast. Tobias wrote while Yvonne talked. Curtis listened and corrected when something needed correcting. They had been at that table for 2 hours, and the coffee had gone completely cold, and none of them had moved to make a fresh pot. 3 things, Yvonne said, holding up 3 fingers. All 3 happen before we walk in the door. Not one of them can wait until after. She pressed down the first finger. The bank fraud report. We file a formal complaint against Patrice with both the bank and the loan company. We submit the credit report showing the unauthorized loan, the forged signature, all of it. That gets the financial institutions moving on their end independently of anything we do in person. Tobias wrote it down. Bank fraud report. Loan company plus Tobias's bank. Submit before Saturday. She pressed down the second finger. State complaint on the death record, or the lack of one. She had a folder in front of her, already tabbed. She flipped it open to a page she'd printed the day before from the State Vital Records Office website. No death certificate was ever filed. There's a false obituary, a private memorial with no official documentation attached, and a cremation paid for by Patrice with no coroner's report and no out-of-state accident report to back up the story she told. She slid the page toward Tobias, fabricating the death of a living person for financial purposes. That's fraud. The state needs to know Adriani Reed is alive and using a different name. Tobias looked at the page without picking it up. He had stood at that memorial. He had worn a dark suit that still hung in the back of his closet, because he had never been able to figure out what to do with it. He had shaken hands with people he barely knew while Patrice stood beside him and cried into a folded tissue. He picked up the page, filed it in his own folder. Third, Yvonne said, pressing the last finger down. The property management company holding the Meridian Court lease. I send them a written notification, certified mail, that the co-tenant listed as Adriani M. Hale is operating under a fraudulent identity. I include a copy of the lease and what we have on the name discrepancy. She paused. They have their own liability at that point. They'll move. How fast? Curtis asked. Fast enough. If I send it Thursday, they'll have it by Friday. By the time we show up Saturday morning, that lease is already a problem for Desmond, whether he knows it yet or not. Tobias set down his pen. He looked at the 3 action items listed on the pad in front of him. Who delivers the reports? He asked. I file the state complaint, Yvonne said. I have the template and the supporting docs already organized. The bank and loan fraud report, you file that yourself. It needs to come from you as the victim of record. Fine. And the property management letter goes out from me Thursday morning. She tapped the table twice, which means we need everything ready to go by Wednesday night. No loose ends going into Thursday. Curtis reached across the table and tapped the lease agreement sitting near Tobias's elbow. You're also going to want certified copies of all of this, not just printed. Certified. I can have Ron pull official copies through the records office. Anything Yvonne pulled through paralegal access is solid, but certified copies carry more weight if this goes further. It will go further, Yvonne said flatly. She wasn't asking. Then we get certified copies. Tobias looked at his father. Can Ron have them by Wednesday? I'll call him tonight. Tobias nodded. He turned back to the pad and drew a line beneath the 3 action items. Below it, he wrote a single word. Saturday. Patrice said the visit was this weekend, he said. She didn't give me an exact time. She said she needed to prepare. That tells me they're coming in the morning, not the evening. We go at 10, Yvonne said. Early enough to catch them before anyone has plans to leave. Late enough that you're not showing up before they're all awake. You and me at the door, Tobias said. He looked at his father. You stay with the car. Curtis didn't argue. He dipped his chin once. I'll be there. If anything goes sideways, nothing's going sideways, Yvonne said. She said it the way she said most things, like it had already been decided. You walk in with documentation for every single claim. There is nothing they can dispute that you don't already have an answer for. They have no room to spin this. Tobias closed the legal pad. He looked at the stack of documents spread across his father's kitchen table. The lease, the forged loan application, the bank records, the funeral home paperwork. 3 years of $900 transfers. Adrienne's handwriting on a dotted line. All of it organized. All of it real. All of it his. He didn't sleep much that night. Not because he was afraid. Not because he was angry. He had moved past both of those things somewhere in the middle of the week, on a night when he'd sat in his car in the parking lot of his office for 20 minutes before he could make himself drive home. Just breathing. He was past afraid. He was past angry. He was ready. He sat at his kitchen table at 11:15, the same table where he'd opened his laptop and found her face. Every document was printed. Every document was in a manila folder, tabbed and labeled in his own handwriting. He went through them one at a time, slowly, reading each page the way he read logistics reports at work. Not for new information, because there was no new information, but to confirm, to make sure every piece was exactly where it was supposed to be. The bank records, the loan application with Patrice's forgery of his signature, the lease for Meridian Court, Claremont. 2 names, one of them a lie. The funeral home documentation, no death certificate, no body. Nothing. He closed the folder. He set it on the table beside 3 others, neatly stacked, edges aligned. He looked at his left hand. The ring caught the kitchen light the way it always did. He didn't take it off. Not tonight. Tonight it was still part of the roll. Tomorrow, that roll ended. The building was 3 stories of red brick on a quiet street, with a parking lot half full of weekend cars and a front entrance propped open by a rubber doorstop. A woman was carrying grocery bags in from the lot. A kid was riding a bike in slow circles near the curb. Ordinary. Quiet. Just a Saturday morning. Tobias pulled into a space near the entrance and cut the engine. None of them spoke for a moment. 214, Yvonne said from the passenger seat, looking at her phone. 2nd floor. Tobias nodded. He looked in the rearview mirror at Curtis, who sat with his hands folded in his lap, steady as a rock. You'll stay with the car, Tobias said. Already planned on it. Curtis met his eyes in the mirror. You've got this, son. Tobias didn't answer. He picked up the manila folder from the seat beside him, the one with the tabbed edges, the one he had gone through page by page the night before. He got out of the car. Yvonne was already at the entrance by the time he reached it. They took the stairs. The hallway on the 2nd floor smelled like carpet cleaner and someone's breakfast. Muffled television noise came from behind one door. The overhead light buzzed faintly. 214 was at the end of the hall. A small wreath hung on the door, the kind Patrice always had. Seasonal. Decorative. A woman who cared about appearances. Tobias stopped in front of the door. He took one breath. Not for courage. Just to settle. He knocked. Footsteps. A pause. Then the door opened, and Patrice Walcott stood in the frame in a house robe, her reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair. Her face cycled through its expressions in about 1 second flat. Surprise, then warmth, then something that flickered just underneath the warmth. Something careful. Tobias. She smiled wide. I wasn't expecting you, honey. Come in. Come in. She glanced at Yvonne, and the smile stayed, but the eyes didn't match it. Yvonne? Good morning, Patrice, Yvonne said pleasantly, and stepped through the door before Patrice could reconsider holding it. Tobias followed. The apartment was small and warm. The television was on in the living room, volume low. There was a coffee cup on the side table and a grocery bag on the kitchen counter, not yet unpacked. And on the couch, looking up from her phone with an expression that didn't have enough time to become anything controlled? Adrienne. She looked older. Her hair was shorter. She was wearing a green sweater, and she had a small gold necklace at her collarbone that Tobias had never seen before. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they had convinced themselves they would never see again. A man stood from the armchair beside her a half-second later. Big shoulders, jeans, a plain gray t-shirt. He looked at Tobias the way a man looks at someone he recognizes from a description. Desmond. Nobody spoke for 3 full seconds. Then Adrienne said quietly, Tobias. Sit down, Tobias said. Not loud, not mean, just clear. Adrienne sat back down. Desmond didn't move. Tobias set the manila folder on the coffee table and opened it. He did it the same way he had done it in his head a dozen times. Slowly, without rushing. I'm going to say all of this once, he said. I need all 3 of you to hear it at the same time, because what I'm about to put on this table involves all 3 of you. He laid the first document down. The funeral home paperwork. No death certificate, no out-of-state accident report, no coroner's filing. A cremation paid for by Patrice, an obituary written by Patrice, and a private memorial arranged by Patrice. All of it built around a death that never happened. Patrice's mouth opened. Tobias kept going. He laid down the second document. The bank records. 3 years of $900 transferred. Every dollar I sent went directly into an account under the name Adrienne Hale. Not to a landlord. Not to Patrice. To Adrienne, who was alive. He paused. The whole time. He laid down the third document. The loan application. This is a personal loan taken out in my name. My signature is on it. I didn't sign it. Yvonne had a handwriting analyst confirm it. He looked directly at Patrice. You did? Patrice's face had gone the color of old paper. The fourth document. The lease. He said it in front of Desmond. Adrienne M. Hale. That's the name on this lease. You co-signed it. That name isn't real. And you know that, because the woman sitting next to you isn't Adrienne Hale. She's Adrienne Reed, my wife. He let Desmond look at his own signature at the bottom. You signed this knowing exactly what you were signing. The room was so quiet that the television across the apartment seemed loud. Then Adrienne's voice came out low and shaky. I didn't have a choice, Tobias. Things were, I was in debt. I was drowning. I didn't know how to tell you. I was going to come back eventually. I was going to... She planned this, Patrice said, cutting over her daughter's voice like a knife through paper. This was all Adrienne's idea. I only helped because she's my daughter. I didn't understand what I was doing with the loan. She had me sign things. Mama. Adrienne's voice came out sharp and stung. Don't you dare. I'm not going to prison for you. You forged his signature. You told me it was a formality. Both of you. Desmond stepped forward, his jaw tight. Both of you. Stop. He looked at the lease document on the table. He looked at his own name on it. A muscle moved in his jaw. He didn't say anything else, because there was nothing to say. The paper said it for him. Adrienne turned on him next. You knew what we were doing. Don't stand there like you're innocent. Her voice cracked. You helped set up the account. You set up the... I helped you, he said, quieter. I didn't forge anything. You signed a fake name on a lease. I signed your name. My name isn't Hale. I know that now. You knew it then. The three of them had fully turned on each other now, voices overlapping, each one pulling the story's seams apart, trying to find the thread that pointed somewhere else, away from them, toward the others. Tobias watched it. He let it happen. Every word they said filled in something. Every accusation confirmed something. He didn't write any of it down. He didn't need to. Yvonne was standing to his left with her phone in her hand, and he could see the little red dot of the voice memo app in the corner of the screen. When the room finally went quiet again, all three of them slightly breathless, all three of them looking at each other with something past suspicion, Tobias spoke. I'm not here for an apology. He picked up his folder and tucked each document back inside, one at a time, neat and unhurried. I'm here to close every account any of you opened in my name. He looked at all three of them once, without raising his voice. That's already in motion. It was in motion before I knocked on that door. He turned toward the hallway. Yvonne was right behind him. He didn't look back. The conference room on the 14th floor had a wall of windows that looked out over the city. Late afternoon light came through the glass in long, flat sheets, cutting across the round table where maybe a dozen people sat. Some of them had been with the company longer than Tobias. A few of them had applied for the same position he had. Tobias sat at the end of the table in a gray suit, hands folded in front of him, while his regional director, a compact woman named Sandra Okafor, read from a single printed page. Effective the 1st of next month, Sandra said, Tobias Reed moves into the Director of Operations role for the Eastern Division. She looked up over her reading glasses. This has been a long time coming. A round of applause, honest and warm, the kind that meant it. Tobias accepted it the way he accepted most things now, quietly, with a nod and a small, genuine smile. Afterward, in the hallway, a younger guy from his old team named Marcus caught up with him and stuck out his hand. Director Reed, he said, grinning. That's going to take some getting used to. Tobias shook his hand. Don't let it, he said. He drove home with the windows down, the early spring air cool and clean through the car. The radio was on low. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. That was the part that had taken the longest to learn. How to let a quiet moment stay quiet, without his mind pulling it back toward something dark. He had gotten better at it. The apartment he lived in now was smaller than the house he and Adrienne had shared, but it was his. Clean lines, good light, a kitchen he actually cooked in. No more sitting at a table going through bills with a dead woman's photograph on the wall. He changed out of his suit and sat on the couch. His phone buzzed with a text from Yvonne. Heard from Sandra's assistant. Congratulations, big head. He smiled and typed back, Tell your kid I'll pick him up Saturday for the game. She sent back a thumbs up and then, a second later, He's been talking about it all week. Tobias set the phone on the cushion beside him. He thought about where things had landed. Not with grief, not with anger. Just the way a man reviews a completed project. One final check to confirm every box had been closed. Patrice had been prosecuted. Identity theft and loan fraud, 2 separate charges, both proven clean by Yvonne's groundwork and the handwriting analysis. She had lost the apartment. The garnishment of her wages had started 4 months ago. A court-ordered restitution that drained back what she had taken. The last time anyone in Tobias's world had heard her name, she was living with a cousin 2 towns over and calling nobody. Adrieni's fabricated identity had unraveled publicly once the fraud case opened. The obituary, the fake cremation records, the bank account under the false name, all of it entered the public record. Her liability for the drained joint savings account had been established in the civil proceeding, and the restitution order covered a portion of what she had taken. There had been no dramatic breakdown, no tearful phone call to Tobias. The last he knew, she was dealing with it through a lawyer, alone. Desmond had lost the lease within 6 weeks of that morning at Patrice's apartment. The property management company had moved fast once Yvonne flagged the false identity co-signature. Without the lease and with a fraud complaint attached to his name, his footing with Adrienne had crumbled just as fast. Whatever they had built together had not been strong enough to survive the moment it cost something real. It turned out what they had shared wasn't love. It was logistics. And once the logistics fell apart, so did they. Tobias had finalized the divorce the previous fall. The process had been strange, filing for a legal dissolution of a marriage the state had believed was ended by death. But Yvonne had guided him through every step. The judge had been thorough. And then it was done. He had signed the final papers on a Tuesday afternoon, driven home, and made dinner. That was it. No ceremony to it. No grief. Just the closing of a door that should have been closed years ago. There was a woman named Claire he had been seeing for a few months. Slowly, carefully. She knew his history, and she hadn't flinched at it. She asked good questions and didn't push for answers before he was ready to give them. On their third dinner, she had said, "I'm not in any hurry," and he had believed her. He was still getting used to believing people, but he was getting there. His phone buzzed again. He picked it up, expecting Yvonne. It was his banking app, a deposit notification. He tapped it. Restitution transfer received, 900 frailes. He stared at the number for a moment. $900, landing in his account. The mirror image of every payment he had sent out for 3 years like clockwork, every one of them going somewhere he hadn't known, to someone he hadn't understood. Now it ran the other direction. Tobias set the phone down on the cushion and leaned back. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.